Last night at the State of the Union address, while Donald Trump was giving his version of America to Congress, congressional Democrats invited people that are actually living with the consequences of this administration. My name's Mason. I'm a progressive live streamer known as One Hand Politics, and I've partnered with Courier to bring you the most pressing news of the day. Some quick context: every single state has members of Congress inviting guests. These guests are typically there to reinforce policy priorities, respond to the president's agenda, and also deliver a visual aid to political messaging from either party that brings their guests. It is message warfare. The audience at the State of the Union address isn't just there to watch a speech, they are part of the political argument. And that's why this year mattered specifically, because Hakeem Jeffries, the most powerful Democrat in the House of Representatives, specifically instructed congressional Democrats to sit there in silent opposition. Personally, I completely disagree with that strategy. We need more vocal opposition. We need people loud about how much they distrust this authoritarian fascist regime. Nevertheless, they went with silent defiance. So those guests that they brought mattered a lot because they were there to actually demonstrate what Democrats felt about this administration. The centerpiece of Democratic messaging for this State of the Union address was lack of transparency amongst the Trump administration. This is with ICE and not having accountability or actually disclosing what the plans are for continued abuse of Americans. And it also relates to the Epstein files, which is at the forefront of many Americans' minds. Big reason why is because millions of documents have just been released, many of them heavily redacted, and we've started to see trickles of unredacted material that is told by Congress, who finally has had access to these documents. That being said, there's a lot of hurdles that Congress actually has to go through in order to see these unredacted files, including speaking with staff of the Department of Justice and having a staff member watch everything that they do when they're going through these files. These files are typically operated on very old, antiquated technology that's difficult to navigate, and they're not allowed to bring in any comparative documents like old redacted Epstein files that they're comparing for the new unredacted material. No notebooks, no nothing. It's just congressional members that are going in, getting access to view it, and then they have to use the recollection of their memory in order to tell their constituents what's actually happening in the government. Multiple Democrats invited survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and their family members. Haley Robson was invited by Representative Ro Khanna, who's leading the Epstein Transparency Act coalition. Danny Bensky was invited by Senator Chuck Schumer, and family members connected to victim Virginia Gruffey. Why this matters is because the Epstein issue is at the forefront of every American's mind right now. After the speech was over, survivors of Epstein publicly criticized Trump. They demanded that all of the documents had to be released, accused the administration of shielding powerful people, and one survivor even called the administration's actions a magic show theatrics. In an interview with CNN after Trump's speech, Robson was asked what her thoughts were on the White House assertion that President Trump has done more for Epstein victims than anyone before him. She replied, "It's a magic show. It's theatrics, is what it is. The tactics are very similar to Jeffrey Epstein, honestly. It's I'm going to pretend that I'm doing something as a grand gesture to help you, but behind closed doors when nobody's looking, I'm going to make it very difficult for this to move forward." Robson added that even though Trump signed off on the bill calling for the release of the Epstein files, she said he switched his stance on it when it was clear that the vote was going to be unanimous. She said his actions like were Houdini, the famous American magician known for his escape acts. So yes, he might have been the person to sign off on the bill, but again, it's a mirage, Robson said. Most tellingly, Donald Trump didn't mention Epstein a single time in the longest State of the Union speech in American history. Nearly 2 hours of the president yapping, not a single mention of Epstein. He talked about the economy, foreign policy, security, his own personal excitement for his character. Not a single talk about the Epstein investigation. Let's hear from Congresswoman Jayapal why she decided to bring an Epstein victim to the State of the Union address.
And her guest, Marika Shartuni, who is an Epstein abuse survivor. Thank you both so much for being with us tonight. I know it is a busy night ahead. Marika, if I can, I'd like to start with you. This is obviously not your first time on the Hill. You and I have spoken before, but tell me why you felt like it was important to be here tonight in Washington.
I think it's important to show up to remind lawmakers that we're not going away. We're not going to be quiet. And we're here because we want accountability and we want the files released.
Congresswoman Jayapal, you will actually not be in the chamber tonight. Of course, Marika will be there. Tell me more about why you decided to invite her as your guest and why you decided to make that move. What message are you sending?
Yeah, absolutely. Marika is my constituent, so I proudly represent her in Seattle. And she's been an incredible, courageous voice for survivors across the country, across the world. And I think it's really important that we have survivors right there in the gallery looking at Donald Trump and ensuring that he looks at them, ensuring that he is accountable for his Department of Justice that has released only 50% of the files that need to be released, and unfortunately redacted the names of powerful predators and left the names of survivors unredacted. Those are all things that he needs to respond to, and the investigations that need to happen are under his watch. Right now, we need accountability for these survivors, and we need to bring to justice these horrible predators and pedophiles that are in the Epstein files. Every single person needs to be brought to justice.
We're looking ahead later this week, potentially to those Clinton depositions. You've expressed your frustration pretty clearly directly to the Attorney General, of course, in that hearing just recently. What is your message to the administration, to the White House on this?
They can't keep covering this up. We are not going to sit down. The survivors are not going to go away. This is not a hoax. We're not moving on. And they need to release the files and they need to start investigations where I believe there is prosecutable evidence. At minimum, there are real investigative leads in there that need to be followed up on. And we need to bring these people to justice, just like the UK is doing. These are all the kinds of things that need to be happening right here in the United States.
Yes.
I'll ask you here.
That is excellent. We need to make more comparative analyses of what's happening in Europe where there's actual accountability. People are being demanded to resign from their positions simply for having indirect involvement with Epstein. And yet here in the United States, there's been almost no investigations into specific persons relating to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. We need the perpetrators to be known to the American people, and we need actual accountability. It's not enough that people know who the worst people are. We need to see them behind bars. We need to see genuine consequences for these disgusting actions. Another really powerful guest was Reza Contreras, who's invited by Chuck Schumer. Her son was a Venezuelan student who entered the US legally, but was detained by ICE after a required court appearance. This is a direct counter to Trump's messaging that ICE is there to go after criminals. They're going after the worst of the worst. They're making our city safer. No, they are literally going after families who did things the legal way. Here was a family who followed the rules and still got caught in the system of abuse, where ICE was able to detain him after going to the courts. They always say we want people to do things the legal way. What's more legal than going to a court hearing and immediately getting detained by ICE? Throughout the night, Donald Trump also self congratulated himself on what he called the best economy America's ever seen. There are things to point to that are achievements like the Dow and the stock market, but those are not metrics that are indicative of the average experience of working class Americans. And specifically, farmers are getting the most screwed over by a lot of Trump's monetary policies. So, Wisconsin soybean farmer Doug Rabout literally came in to say how Trump's tariffs triggered retaliation from China, hurt soybean exports, and increased economic pressure on farmers. That is a clear, stark contrast to Trump, who says the strong economy is what's making farmers more successful, which is an outright lie. This was somebody, Doug Rabout, whose livelihood was directly hit by those policies. There's a very clear pattern here. Powerful people versus accountability. Democrats bring in the Epstein survivors. Enforcement versus fairness. Democrats bring in an ICE detainee family who did things the legal way and was still abused. And Democrats show the difference between economic strength versus real world pain. These tariffs are destroying farmers. This was deliberate strategy to demonstrate visually the type of people that are being affected by this disgusting administration. The question for Democrats, though, is are these visual aids enough? Because bringing survivors and struggling families into the room does matter to tell the story, but voters want to also see policy action and political fights. That needs to be paired with this same visual messaging. Trump used the State of the Union address to try to tell America that everything is working and going fine. Democrats responded by filling the room with people whose lives say otherwise. This speech was not just about policy, it is about which version of America voters believe. And when they see their neighbors struggling, when they see that their economic opportunities are failing, and when they see a president who only cares about self congratulations, they know the true story.